Alex Haigh, director de Valoración de Brand Finance, para que nos lo cuente él. Alex, welcome. Hi.
Lovely to be here.
How are you? So you've just published the Brand Finance Europe 500 2021 ranking. So first of all, we all want to know which ones are on the top 10.
Well, so the top 10 is very much dominated by the German brands. Mercedes is top with about 49 billion euros worth of value. It's followed by T-Mobile, which has grown quite significantly this year, VW, and some of the other German automakers. The others in the other countries in the top 10 are the Netherlands, the Shell, and EY. With that's from the UK. Unfortunately, Spain doesn't make it in there, but it does give a fairly large amount of value in the overall table. So it's a good result.
You have just told us which was the value of these 500 brands. How the pandemic has impacted this value?
So the value, total value of the top 500 European brands is about 1.8 billion euros. Mm-hmm. If we compare that to the US 500, where they have about $4 billion worth, it's obviously not a direct translation, but it shows the translation of the kind of size of the top US brands. Now, the US is famed for being slightly more corporate economy with larger big businesses than Europe, but I think it's a sign of some of the trends that have been happening both within the pandemic and before. So if we look at the results of the European brands, we can see that 8 out of the top 10 have dropped in value, and the overall table has dropped in value by 200 billion euros, which is about 10% of the overall value, while the US has stayed steady or in fact increased a little bit. That's really because the European Union and the whole of Europe have a large number of brands that were quite significantly affected by the pandemic. Banks, telecoms companies, even utilities. And whereas in the US, the technology companies and actually the retailers did very well. They managed to switch to a model that was able to make money fairly quickly. So I think what we've seen is the decline of old or traditional businesses and the rise of new industries this year.
Have compared Europe to USA, but what about Asia?
So in particular in China, the Chinese brands have grown from strength to strength. What we found last year was that although China was the first to be affected by the pandemic, it was also by far and away the first to be the first to respond and the first to recuperate the losses from the pandemic. We've now seen it being one of only a handful of economies that have grown over the last year, and that's shown in their results too. Now, maybe 10 years ago, there were very few Chinese brands in our top rankings of the sectors, and now they're on top or very present in all of the sectors. ICBC is the biggest brand, the biggest banking brand in China, and it's also the biggest banking brand in the world. In the top 10, we see 4 or 5 Chinese brands. It's the same across all industries. There is a very strong push by the Chinese government, which is felt in the whole of the Chinese economy to grow brands. That can't be said across all economies, but particularly in China, there's a really strong growth of brands. And in fact, what we've seen is that in our global 500, in our table of the global brands, US brands and Chinese brands dominate completely. And that has been over the last 5 to 10 years completely to the detriment of European brands. The share of US brands in that table has stayed steady at about 40% of brands, 40% of value. And the share of European brands has gone from about 25 down to 10 to 15% of value. And all of that has been taken by Chinese brands. So what we're really seeing is that the kind of three core areas, three core economic areas, US, China, and Europe, are fighting it out. And at the moment, Europe needs to find its position within that, because for the last few years, it's been declining.
Mm-hmm. German brands represent a quarter of the total brand value, followed by France with 20%. But what about Spain? How many Spanish brands contribute to this ranking, and which kind of companies are they?
So there are 35 Spanish brands within the ranking, but they tend to be a little bit smaller than other than the brands from Germany, France, and the UK, which makes sense given the slightly smaller size of the Spanish economy. But also, and therefore the overall contribution is about 5% of the total value. I think that's about 90 billion euros worth. But I think the interesting thing about the contribution of value from Spanish brands is that is the dominance of certain industries. So in particular, banks, where Spain has always been very strong, textiles and apparel, so think of brands like Zara, construction and engineering, and related services. And then importantly, and in our view, key to some of the future growth of Spanish brands and European brands more generally, utilities brands and new energy brands. Now, Iberdrola, for example, has been one of the few large brands to have grown, and that's really because they're embracing new technologies in the form of new ways to make energy, and where the European brands and the European economy has sort of been a step behind the US and China in technological developments in other industries. Europe is absolutely at the forefront of technological development in new energy production, and we expect to see a lot of the growth in that area going forward.
Alex, just to finish, in the top three of this brand Europe 500 2021 ranking, we have two automotive brands, Mercedes-Benz and Volkswagen. Is automotive the most valuable industry? And what about banking, for example?
Yes, it absolutely is. Yeah, so automobiles is the largest in value, absolutely dominated by the German brands, but obviously Europe as a whole is well known, and SEAT has even grown this year as well. But then it's followed by banks. Banks used to be a very much larger part of the overall mix, but given the issues since the financial crisis, that has fallen a little bit. Then it's followed by retail, which has done well this year, and followed after that by a mixture of utilities, like I say, energy, oil and gas, telecoms.
Okay. Well, Alex Haigh, thank you very much for being with us this morning and explain us this Brand Finance Europe 500 2021 ranking. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.